By the time we moved into the new apartment together, our relationship was already dying, but neither one of us wanted to fully say it out loud yet. But you could honestly feel it. The energy between us had completely changed, and we had stopped functioning like a real couple. We barely spent time together, barely communicated, and barely slept in the same bed anymore. Most nights, I'd either find her asleep on the couch, or I'd fall asleep alone by myself. And after a while, you stop asking questions because deep down you're scared of the answers. And that was me. I knew something was wrong, but I had just kept trying to convince myself it could still be fixed. But the truth is, once emotional disconnection settles deeply enough into a relationship, resentment starts replacing intimacy. And resentment changes people. I became angry all the time, and I was extremely short tempered and emotionally reactive. And I'm not saying this because I was some kind of monster or something like that, but because internally I felt abandoned while I was still being in the relationship. And that messes with your mind. Makes you start living in a state of confusion. And one minute you're there trying to hold things together, and the next minute you're feeling completely unwanted. And eventually every little disagreement started turning into explosions. Little things became huge arguments. I'd lose my temper, raise my voice, and slam doors. Meanwhile, she'd go emotionally cold and shut down completely. And that combination is toxic. One person exploding emotionally while the other withdraws emotionally. Nothing ever gets resolved in that dynamic. Everything just kept building underneath the surface. Then we got the new apartment. And honestly, I thought maybe a fresh environment would fix us. People do that a lot. New apartment, new city, new start. As if changing locations fixes those internal problems. But unresolved issues follow you wherever you go, and ours followed us immediately. We moved in around Halloween, had friends over, had this big welcome party, and then tried acting like everything was normal. Then almost instantly, we went right back into emotional distance again. Separate routines, separate lives, separate emotional worlds. And that's when I started looking for a dog again. And honestly, that dog became one of the only things keeping me emotionally grounded during that period of life. That's when I found Shaggy. 7 months old, massive paws, and some huge ears on him. And he just had an awkward personality. The first meeting between us didn't even go perfectly. He growled at me during the initial interaction because I accidentally startled him. But I went back the next day alone, and something just clicked between us. And I still remember driving home with him that day thinking, this dog is about to become my best friend. And he did. Because when life got extremely emotionally chaotic after that, sometimes that unconditional loyalty becomes the thing that just keeps you going. But while I was bonding with Shaggy, my relationship was completely unraveling. The arguments became constant, and eventually Thanksgiving rolled around. We went to her family's house like we always did, but something felt different that year. I barely talked to anyone. I mostly sat outside staring into a fire by myself, and I was just completely disconnected mentally. And while I sat there, I started thinking about conversations we had months earlier. There was a house next door to her mom's place, an opportunity, a little bit of land, some space, and a possible future. And at one point, her family had talked about helping us potentially move into it someday. And while I was sitting there staring into that fire, I realized nobody had mentioned the house in a long time. So on the drive home, I asked about it. A simple question. That's all it was supposed to be. But her response to that changed everything. She told me her mom was planning on getting the house for her. not for us, for her. And immediately I felt blindsided, confused, and angry. Because in my mind, none of that made sense. Why move into a brand new apartment together, sign a brand new lease together, talk about a future together, if you were already planning a future without me? That argument exploded fast. And honestly, a lot of painful things got said that night on both sides. Then she finally said it. She broke up with me. She told me that I had anger problems, told me I didn't know how to communicate with women, and told me most of the relationship problems were my fault. And here's the hardest part. I believed her completely. Because when somebody repeatedly blames you during a relationship breakdown, eventually you stop questioning their narrative and you start questioning yourself instead. So after the breakup, that's exactly what I did. I started just tearing myself apart on the inside, analyzing everything, wondering if I really was the entire problem, wondering if I had just ruined the relationship single handedly. And for a couple weeks after, we kept trying to connect, or reconnect, I should say, through, letters, some conversations, and emotional talks. But deep down inside, something inside me just kept screaming, run. Not out of hatred, not out of revenge, just out of survival. And I didn't fully understand why that was being said at the time until Christmas. That's when everything changed. A close friend of mine called me one night and asked me to come over, and I could tell immediately from his tone that something serious was happening. And after some small talk, he told me he needed to tell me something, but couldn't say it directly. So he turned it into this weird guessing game because he was trying to protect the person who originally told him. And at first, I thought the whole thing sounded just ridiculous. But the more questions I asked, the clearer things became. Then finally, the truth hit me. She had cheated on me. And the second I realized it, my entire perception of the relationship changed entirely. Because suddenly all the emotional distance, all the coldness, all the shifts in the behavior finally made sense. And I remember mentally replaying the timeline over and over and over again, trying to figure out when exactly it happened. And the only period that made sense was the beginning of the year when I was working constantly, 7 days a week, gone all the time, and emotionally exhausted. Trying to build a future while our relationship quietly collapsed behind the scenes. And once that realization hit, I started seeing everything differently. The manipulation, the guilt shifting, the emotional withdrawal, and the constant blame. All of it. And here's something painful I had to accept. People who feel guilty but refuse accountability will often make you feel like the villain to avoid facing themselves. And that realization broke me mentally for a while, because I wasn't just grieving a relationship anymore. I was grieving the reality I thought I was living in. And that's a completely different kind of pain. It's one thing to lose somebody. It's another thing entirely to realize the version of the relationship you were fighting for may not have existed the way that you believed it did. And after that, things between us became unbearable. We were still living together while broken up, still trapped in the same apartment, same space, same tension. And mentally, I was spiraling. Fast. I couldn't, I just couldn't heal while seeing her every single day. I couldn't move on while hearing her constantly talk to other people on the phone. I couldn't think clearly while living inside of that emotional chaos. And honestly, that season brought out the worst parts of me emotionally. Because unresolved betrayal, mixed with anger, confusion, exhaustion, and heartbreak, becomes dangerous if you don't process it correctly. Eventually, I hit a breaking point, and then I started going to church again and started rebuilding my relationship with God. I started working constantly again and started walking with Shaggy after work every day just to clear my head. And slowly, for the first time in years, I started realizing something important. Maybe this breakup wasn't destroying me. Maybe, just maybe, it was exposing everything inside of me that still needed healing.